Because watch this. I'll slap myself 3 times, I'll turn on the charm, and nobody will fucking know.
Yeah, but...
Welcome to Studio 2009. I'm, of course, TF Joe and Mike. Joining me for our latest podcast approach is a man who wants to fly like a bird, as well as how he just can't stop punching himself. That's an old joke, folks. No one's going to get that. No one's going to remember that one. Yes, that's right, folks. Making his return to Studio 2009, it's Mike the Birdman from This Week in Geek.
Yes, it is I have returned to the place from whence I just kind of hung out occasionally. But yeah, I'm back.
Yes.
It has been quite a while, actually.
Yes, I think those clones destroyed us because we couldn't even get any Revenge of the Sith on them.
That's true, but hopefully when schedules clear up and homework stops drowning me, I'll be able to come back and finish up some things with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're here, as people heard last time, in episode 27. Yeah, this is episode 28. Episode 27 was Ben Montgomery from Records Revisited podcast, his podcast approach. And for those of you who haven't heard podcast approach, technically I did this series on this podcast every 5 episodes. I'm throwing that out the window because, no offense to any of the guests, for me personally, this format is the simplest and easiest way to record a podcast. And hey, we get interesting stories from listening and producing and everything else. To kick it off, Mike, when did you first discover podcast, and what was the first one you listened to?
I first became aware of podcasts probably would have been about 2004, maybe 2005. And I used to listen to a podcast called Star Wars Action News, run by Marjorie and Arnie, because at that time I was really into collecting Star Wars Revenge of the Sith figures, and I started getting into the collector community. I used to hang out on yodasnews.com, rebelscum.com, and I used to actually got my first PR gig was at fx-sabers.com. I don't know whether that last site is still around anymore. But yeah, I used to listen weekly, used to send in weekly questions. And that was the first podcast I listened to pretty much right through until when I started going to college back in 2006 for the first time, when I started taking broadcasting from Niagara College. And then that was pretty much the only podcast I ever listened to. I've only really started getting into podcasts truly in the last couple of years have I started actually listening to ones that aren't me. And that feels a little weird. And I know I've been doing this for like 15 years, but I just never really kind of caught on to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I started out as a listener, and then I figured, I could do this. And between you and Steve Saylor and a bunch of other people, I was like, I could do this and all that good stuff. So it was about 2 years from the point that you listened to that first show to the point of you guys really 2 or 3 years, as far as how long between when you started listening to when you started Twig.
Yeah, because Twig started in early 2007 on CRNC 90.1 FM, which is the college radio station, which would broadcast from Welland. And on a good day, you could get it out in St. Catharines. Our radio station, as far as I know, is one of the few that was actively streaming online at the time via Winamp and other things that could pick up the audio that would stream from the kind of campus. And yeah, there weren't a lot of us around. However, though, because my former co-host Steve was really into the whole video podcasting and kind of really plugged into that world, we started attending conventions as guests. In our first one, we were actually featured presenters, I think, and that was PodCamp Toronto back in 2007, where we spoke at Ryerson University, which is one of the largest universities in Canada. And it just kind of went from there. In fact, we almost ended the show like permanently because he went off to Humber, and I remember recording one of our last episodes before he left, and then we decided, we could just keep going. And it was, I can't remember what the topic was, but I know I used the ending of Alien 3, where Ripley's flight recorder is playing over the closure of the prison planet. And she's like, this is Ellen Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo, signing off. And I thought that was a really good way to end the show. Clearly that didn't happen. We're still going, or I'm still going with like Alex. And yeah, it's been quite the ride ever since, because I remember we used to have to talk to Niagara, because at that time podcasts were still relatively new. And I remember us asking the radio program professors and the college itself, like, do we own our own copyright? And they're like, well, I guess so. And we're like, okay, fucking A, right? And they're like, so we can continue the show as we see fit. Yeah, sure, why not? They didn't expect we'd become as successful as we did, because that year we would win one of the broadcasting awards from the college for best radio program, to which Steve promptly broke the fucking trophy. I never even got a chance to bring it home. And yeah, so that was, I'm still sore about that like 15 years later.
Well, I mean, he is blind,
Yeah, but he's not stupid, for Christ's sakes. But yeah, so yeah, we kind of kept going, and then the show expanded its roster as we moved into second year, and then he changed schools to Humber at some point during the year. So there was mostly me. A lot of people I'm not friends with anymore, but there was me, Pierce, David Double D. He's still friends with me, and he does his own podcast now. And then I hooked up with people like AJ, Elizabeth, Stacy, and some other people, and we expanded so much. We had so many programs going at one time. We could have a different show every single day. We would start in production. Our show used to air on Friday mornings at 9:30 or 9 o'clock. We got the full hour on the station with like kind of station breaks. And Dave would produce the infamous Double D rants, some of them which haven't aged particularly well because of the climate that we're in. And we would start writing on Monday morning. Everything would be produced no later than Thursday night, just so we have time to double check the elements, make sure that it works, and make sure that everything was functioning as it should. That also gave everybody the chance to research whatever topics we were going to talk about, because my particular college would focus a lot on sports talk radio and delivering news, and neither topic really interested me, except maybe the journalism angle of certain things, but I never wanted to appear stupid. And we would spend the entire week researching. And I'll admit, back in those days, because we also had a full kind of class schedule as well, I'm not proud of some of those results, but I think we came a long way in such a short time, and we had such a really good on-air chemistry between me and Steve that it made things remarkably natural. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of gravitated towards. Plus, having our own website and the ability to have fans interact with us on the then new platform of Twitter. Hell, we had a MySpace page for a while. And we used to just interact with fans. And the thing was, be humble. Don't be a prick. Don't be an asshole. And then we hooked up with other web creators at the time who have gone on to be titans in their own right. Some, the shining example of hard work and dedication, and other people who shall remain nameless and are total pieces of human garbage. So yeah, we've worked with the entire spectrum of web creation people from the early days to the modern era of podcasting. And it's opened some interesting doors along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I assume the answer to this is audio, but which do you prefer as both a listener, as a fan, and as a producer, audio or video podcasting?
If I am producing, I prefer audio only because it's faster, in my opinion, to do, because I can look at a waveform and odds are I'm probably taking notes at the same time. If I have to remember, I said something here, I'm going to have to edit that out. There was a technical problem here, I'm going to have to edit something out. And I don't like dealing with video. I've never been a video editing guy because when editing a video and audio podcast, you have to worry about sync sound. Sync sound is the making sure your audio matches your video, which is why when you edit film, for example, the director and everybody else will have the clapper board. They'll be like, okay, guys, 3, 2, 1, action. And when you hear that clap I just did, that'll show up on the waveform as this is where sound is now starting, picture is now kind of running. And I hated it. I hated it so much. Although now as a video watcher, I watch a lot of podcasts on YouTube. Some of them work better as, they're virtually audio anyway, because it's usually them just kind of standing there with a microphone talking. But sometimes you'll get some good interactions. Like I remember one of the earliest podcasts I listened to, not weekly, but when screwattack.com used to be around, they used to do a podcast called Side Scrollers, and they started out primarily as audio, and then they migrated to video, and that was okay. When it comes to modern video podcasts, I watch Pat the NES Punk, because sometimes he'll have a really good kind of take on something. I'll watch Fat Man Beyond occasionally if the topic's interesting. And one podcast I'm considering subscribing to their Patreon, but I haven't yet, is probably the Delta Flyers, who do the Star Trek Voyager podcast with Garrett Wong and Robert Duncan McNeil. And I figure, for $5 a month, I'd watch that. But yeah, when it comes to actually listening, always prefer audio because I can throw that on my Google Home and I can do homework or do something else while I'm listening. If it's video, I can do other stuff at the same time, but it's more distracting. And just recently, the only thing I'm really listening to is the Delta Flyers. Occasionally, some true crime podcasts I'll listen to. Like I listened to one about, there was a local murder that happened around here probably about 15 years ago now, maybe a little bit earlier than that, named Tori Stafford. And this person is this incredibly well-researched person where she got interviews with the police that were involved, other witnesses. And I'm thinking that's interesting. And that's the type of podcast I wish more people would be, because it was so well produced, so incredibly well researched. And it just wasn't people bitching for an hour and a half, which is better, the Super Nintendo or the Sega or something like that. And it was something different to see how things have evolved. And even as content creators ourselves, you look at the old video podcasts and how they used to be produced. And now anybody with a semi-decent camera that can shoot at a minimum of 720p up to these 4K podcasts can do incredible work, and you can honestly edit fairly quickly. Hell, I've seen people do entire editing on their iPhones as long as they know what they are doing. So it's astounding how far the format has come since its inception in the early 2000s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody with a smartphone nowadays can be whatever they want to be. What kind of setup did you have when you first started, and what do you have now?
When we first began Twig, obviously I was just coming into Niagara College at the time, and I purchased at that time what was a top-of-the-line MacBook, because I got a really big scholarship from my local reservation. For those of you that don't know, I'm indigenous. I'm Ojibwe Chippewa of Nawash, and the band gave me thousands of dollars, And they're like, what do you need? Well, I need tuition paid, and that was like $3,000 something. What else do you need? Residence would be nice, but my parents paid for that, or my adoptive parents. And what do you need? I need a laptop, because the standard for many, many years was Mac. So I spent over $6,000 on a MacBook, maxed out the RAM, maxed out the hard drive, got as much bells and whistles as I could. I even got Final Cut Pro with it, because I had a friend of mine who was working at the television station I was volunteering at as the audio director. And he was teaching me how to edit on Final Cut Pro when we didn't have assignments due for the evening kind of newscast. And what I have now is I do it primarily from Windows 10. I have a Sound Blaster K3 Plus sound card, which Alex put together for me last year. I use a condenser microphone, which is powered by phantom power, but can also be powered via USB. In the early days, we had some gigantic mixing board. I think it had like 6 inputs. The thing weighed like 20 pounds. But that thing was a beast, and it was Steve's. And I remember, because he didn't want to lug it around to between where he lived and my place. I'm like, fine, fuck, just leave it here. And I think I podcasted more because I was really bored. I'm like, well, I got 2 hours and I know what I'm talking about. I'll just go talk. And it just became integrated into what was then called the Twig Studio, which was the common area of the house I was renting. And it was the MacBook, the mixer. We'd have 4 microphones and stands, because my roommate at the time and best friend, Pierce, was a musician. We could have these floating stands with shock-mounted microphones, which were also condensers, because Steve's board could supply phantom power. So we were sounding better than 90% of the podcasts at that time that were currently being produced. And when we went to college, people would ask to borrow our studio, because why would I try and go through the hassle of going through the college, signing up, dealing with security, when they can go talk to Mikey and maybe he'll help me out? Now, admittedly, a lot of those people are jerks. And if you're listening, fuck you. And I didn't mind helping 9 out of every 10 people who would ask me, because I knew, honestly, they just wanted to get things done and I wanted to help. But some people saw me as a bit of an easy way out, which, whatever. I'm not going to hold it against them. If I had the same position, I would too. And that's how Twig was mostly back in the day. However, though, we used to edit in GarageBand, which was this great piece of audio software for Macs. And I remember learning that because I was taught by Steve. But then we started using a program which is now turned into Adobe Audition, and I think it's known as something else now. I think it's called Pro Tools now. But we learned on a program called Cool Edit Pro, which used to run wonderfully under Windows XP, but it became more and more unstable under Windows 10, and I stopped using that within the last couple of years, because it kept crashing and I would lose so many podcast episodes just because it was such an old program. And then Alex taught me Adobe Audition, and it's virtually the newer version of Cool Edit Pro. Just some of the menus are a little bit different and some of the sections are a little bit different. But once you got the hang of it, it's not so bad, and everything sounds really, really, really fantastic. Although I will admit, I do miss some of my presets, because I remember me and Pierce spent like a week developing shortcuts and like, okay, if this happens, we can go to A. If this happens, we can go to B. But if B and C don't happen, here's C. And if that doesn't work, you could maybe use A with a little bit of D. And we had contingencies in every possible scenario to account for environment, sound, and everything else. And I'm really sad that I lost those particular presets.
Heaven forbid anything happen. We don't want anything to happen. But if your headphones or microphone or your equipment breaks down, do you go back and buy the exact same setup because you know it's the quality that you want, or do you use that opportunity to upgrade?
Depends on what's available at the time. When it comes to computer software, yeah, I tend to go back to what I know, but I'm always willing to learn new tools and technologies as things move forward. Because I know for a long time we used to record Twig over Skype, but then Microsoft fucked that up so badly that we moved to Discord. But as more people started catching on to Discord, the bots that record audio became less and less reliable. Now we use a service called Zencaster, which is a web-based audio client, and we've had maybe one fuck up in 3 years. And thanks to the pandemic, it's a free service until they decide they want to flip the switch. And even then, it's like $20 a month. Who gives a shit? That's like coffee. And we started looking at different other pieces of audio equipment because for years I had a really large soundboard. The problem is because you have to keep unplugging it and plugging it back in, we kept losing them because of the connections. Our microphones and our pieces of audio tech would just get worn out. That simple. I remember one stretch of time between 2014 and 2016, I think I went through 3 audio boards. Maybe some of the quality just wasn't there, but I would always go back and rebuy. I would use Sennheiser mostly for headphones and microphones. My boards were almost always Audio Technica, but we started getting review products from Sound Blaster. And we really lucked into this sound card because it's no bigger than like a CD, really. And it's maybe an inch or so tall and about as wide as like a CD, maybe a little bit bigger. And it's just been so remarkably useful. It's so remarkably portable. It's got 2 XLR inputs plus 2 auxiliary plus the headphones. When it comes to headphones, I used to only use Sennheiser because that was the radio standard at the time. I'm alone in this one. I know this, but I've always had a good relationship with Astro. And years upon years ago, I got a set of Astro A30s and Astro A40s sent to me for review. I'm talking 2009, 2010. So the tech is pretty old. But I still use them to this very day. In fact, my A30s died last year, and they lasted me like 10 years. They were the Metal Gear Solid 3 ones. Metal Gear Peace Walker. But a friend of mine who worked for Ubisoft was going through his closet, and he came across a pair of Far Cry 3 ones. And I said, dude, can I buy those from you? I love those headphones. You can keep the audio tags, which are things that appear on your ears. And he's like, nah, man, just pay the postage and they're yours. So I primarily use a wired headphone connection. Although for years, and I only had to stop this literally in the last month or so, I'd had a pair of Logitech wireless headphones, but because of the way wireless technology works on Bluetooth and on radio frequencies, I started getting a lot of interference. You know, being handicapped, it's hard for me to get up. However, thanks to the sound card and really long USB cables, I can put the board on my bed, I can jack in hardwired, and the connection is fantastic. But Logitech does make a really good wireless headset, and I really enjoyed that.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I've had, thanks to someone who else has been on Podcast Approach, Mr. Dustin Vancour, he mentioned to me about some JVC big can ear things. It's what I have now. I've gone through 2 pairs of them so far. And I still have my CAD U37, so there's that. All right. Did you think you'd be podcasting for as long as you have?
No, actually. Like I said, we originally could have stopped the show as early as 2008, maybe even 2007. But when I went to Hamilton in 2009, when I started going off to grad school for public relations, I lived with Dave, another guy named Stefan, and we could have another room that was dedicated to the studio. Plus, we were getting boxes upon boxes of review stuff per day. And I'm like, guys, we can keep doing this. And they're like, all right, what do we got to do? I'm like, well, same thing as we did in Welland. We have got a week, sound not stupid, and let's bring the A game. Let's be funny. And that's when a lot of responsibilities changed, because I was managing a full-time school load, also having a full-time girlfriend, and editing the show, posting the show, because at that time Steve was gone from the site and I was like in charge of 95% of everything. And I'm thinking, you know what? I can manage this. This isn't so hard. I was very quickly proven wrong at the end of 2010, because school just got to be so goddamn much. And even
Wasn't that when I took over?
No, that wasn't until about 2011, 2012.
Okay.
I took a little bit of a break. Yeah, so when I started graduating from public relations in 2010, and when I moved away to a smaller town, that's when I started taking on other projects, which I very stupidly tried to review a game per day. By the way, don't ever do that. And yeah, I realized producing was fun. I could still do it. And as long as I didn't kill myself and maintain the quality that I wanted, I'll just keep going. And my rule with Twig is always going to be, I'm going to keep doing this until it's fun or until I'm 50. And whichever comes first. And right now, I've had my ups and downs because I've had some pretty bad health problems in the past couple of years. But I even broadcasted from the ICU after I lost my leg, because Alex brought in a little microphone. He edited the audio for me, and I was able to do that from the hospital. So if death didn't stop me, inconvenience certainly wasn't going to do it either. And yeah, there's been times where I've lost team members or I've lost touch with people. But when Alex came onto the show in 2016, 2017, I didn't expect him to bring so much life back into it. He helped me revolutionize the production process, helped me streamline a lot of things. We've gone through several website upgrades. He does the entire back end. He'll do about half the editing on anything complicated. It gets passed off to me, which is fine. And he's the review machine, because I balance so much other things with being like a full-time husband and everything else. But yeah, he really helped keep Twig alive. And now that we've worked with people like yourself and Steve, we brought on people like Aaron Paulier, who works on the Star Trek Adventures RPG game. He's got his own show, him and his wife. We work with JT, who started out as a fan of Twig way back in the day. Now he's got a show with me. Another guy named Ken, who started out again as a fan and now is one of our regular contributors on the show. And yeah, it's just been amazing. It feels like we're back in the height of things again, because literally, I think Alex was telling me this as of this recording, which is like November 10th.
Yep.
We have enough content to last us into the middle of next year with one of our shows. We have shows planned out until probably the middle of March. And right now we're just putting together things. So we've got so many things lined up that it's like an assembly line from recording the show on Saturday afternoons. Typically, I have the things edited by like 9 o'clock on Sunday nights. Just depends if I need to take a bit of a nap or something. Or everything is always ready, typically by no later than Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., but almost always Monday morning, 7 a.m. That's when we hit the button, and that's 3 reviews, be they a toy, a movie, a video game, or something, each and every single week. And that's mostly what's kept the passion going, the lights on, is that we're always so busy, and there's always something new and exciting to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I found myself having to change how I do things, because after 13 years of doing review shows, don't get me wrong, I love doing review shows. I love talking about cartoons or movies or comics or whatever. This, for me, is simple, just sitting down, asking people anywhere from 25 to 42 questions about whatever topic it is. I can slap an intro and an outro, and I can do a once-over through the whole thing, and bing, bam, boom, it's, done and easy and whatever. So it seems like from the beginning to now, your podcasting goals have changed. What is it about your podcasting goals from the beginning to now that have changed?
In the beginning, because I was a young, stupid kid, I thought being famous would be awesome. And it's had its shares of ups and downs where, going to a convention and being recognized by a fan, that's really wonderful. And I've met some great people. Let's not get that wrong. But I've also had my fair share of troubles with it as well. I've had stalkers. I've had people who've become targeted harassment. And thankfully, because I'm generally known as a pretty good and tolerant guy, it doesn't last very long, which is very, very, very good. Because I always try and give everybody the benefit of the doubt, even if they're terrible for 5 minutes. And as my podcasting goals have changed, when I came through journalism, when I graduated broadcast in 2009, before I went on to PR, I learned something very important from my journalism teacher, Tammy. And it was the news should always be free. And my mantra has been with Twig since that day. I will never charge for this podcast. I will never do a Patreon or a Ko-fi or whatever. If you want to send a donation, cool. If you want to send us something neat, fine. But I'm never going to ask for it to keep the show going. And I always want to be spreading the news and reporting it as truthfully as I can. Have I made some mistakes along the way? Yeah, like anybody has. And as I get older, I just turned 40 a couple of weeks ago. I want things to be fun. I want things to still be informative. And I hope to leave behind a good impression on people. Because I get fan mail every couple of months, and they always talk about how transformative I've been in their lives, being there since high school in many cases, or me going through my amputation has changed the way they view disability. And most recently, in the last year or so, since I've been rediscovering my Indigenous roots, it's inspired people to take on their own journeys of discovering who they are via Ancestry.ca or those DNA testing services. But they'll also be, you encourage me to reach out to a brother I haven't talked to in years, or I recognize a piece of media as meaning something more. There was a fan letter I got I think it was like about a year or two ago. And the fan wrote to me about my interview I did with Jennifer Hale, who was Commander Shepard, the Fem Shep from Mass Effects 1 through 3 and all the associated DLC. And that was a really good piece. And there's another fan named Miguel, and he's been learning to play my favorite Offspring song for like a year or two, and I think he lives in Brazil or something. I'm probably getting some names wrong here, so if I am, I'm really, really, really sorry. And then there's another fan who's never stopped being there for me, and I got to send a huge shout out to this guy. His name's Clark, and I've only met him once when I went to Texas for the Ironman of Gaming back in 2008. But he always makes it a point to communicate with me on Twitter. He used to call me on my birthday, but with phone rates being the way they are now, I'm like, I don't blame him. But he always interacts on Facebook and Twitter. And I like to be encouraging the people that reach out to me. So as my podcasting goals have changed, especially, like I said, as things begin to wind down on my career, which I'm fine with, I hope I've made a difference in a positive manner for people, and don't just do this because you want to get famous, because you are drowning in a sea of content now.
Yeah.
Do it because you love it. Do it because you genuinely have something you want to express, or you feel the duty to create. And never, this is something I had to learn very, very, very recently, is don't monetize your hobbies if you don't want to. If you suck at singing, don't think you're going to get a record contract from Drake. If you suck at drawing, Marvel may not call you. But if it brings you joy and happiness, do it. And the main reason I keep doing Twig is it's fun. I love entertaining people. I love inspiring people, and not to feed my own ego, but because I generally want to put things better into the world than when I left it. And that's something I learned over the summer with my friend Liam, who said to me, I can't even remember what the context of the conversation was, but he said to me, leave the world a better place than when you found it. And as I started exploring my spirituality side of my indigenous roots, there's a teaching system called the Seven Grandfather Teachings, which I'm still not totally familiar with. And that's kind of something I took from it. I know there's a teaching. I can't remember the sacred animal associated with it. Maybe it's the raven, but I think the term comes to humility. And I hope I've been that. And if I haven't, feel free to call me on it. And I don't know. I want things to be very authentic, very transparent, because I look back on my early career and I cringe. I've done some pretty cringy things in the past, but that's okay because I was a child, I was learning, and I don't think I had any real ill intent towards things. And I hope I can maintain that as I continue riding off into the sunset. Not quite yet, but I would say my ultimate podcasting goal is I hope I've made your world a little bit brighter, a little bit less depressing, and I hope I've given you something that you can look forward to.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think you got a few more years in you. I mean, come on. Come on. Hey, if I can survive a 100-hour edit job, you can survive anything. Anyway, now it is time for Mike the Birdman to lower his shields and let's talk about your podcast listenership, which you mentioned before, but there are interesting questions here. So, as a listener, what defines a good podcast to you?
Quality. First and foremost. Now, I'm not saying you have to be the most slickest podcast in the world, but if it sounds like you're talking in a bathroom at like a Sheetz or something, I've got some problems with you. I want your quality to be consistent. I don't mind if you're opinionated as long as you can back it up with either some conviction or some verifiable facts. I'm a very big believer in making sure you can present a good argument. Basically, thesis and antithesis and synthesis. And I know I'm probably screwing those words up, but I want you to present things in an orderly format. And defining a good podcast means you do all that. If you're going to do a video podcast, it has to be well lit. If it's not well lit, it looks like shit. People can forgive a little bit of darkness, but people cannot forgive bad audio, or they can't, or if it's great video, or if it's shitty audio, but good video, they're going to tune out. So you always have to make sure you ride that balance of production quality in that regards. In terms of what makes a good podcast, in terms of content, be interesting, be entertaining, and be willing to share the spotlight with whoever your guest is, whoever the material is, and be willing to be wrong. And certain topics come down to opinion, but always be willing to listen to the other person and at least entertain them. And obviously there are certain things you just shouldn't entertain, because I think we can all universally agree Nazis are bad. But if someone says, I really enjoy Zack Snyder's Justice League, for example, okay, that's an interesting perspective, maybe a little controversial. Why is that? And as long as you're willing to give a person a respectful platform to talk, then that is totally fine, and I'm willing to engage with that conversation.
So we can insert all the awesomeness that is Nickelback right here, right?
Kind of prefer Marvel movies. We are Marvel. Yeah, but you're Marvel licensed by Fox. It's like if the Beatles were produced by Nickelback. It's music, but it sucks.
Hey, that's it. I'm done. I've had it with all this Nickelback hating, all right? You think that makes you cool with the cool kids in school, Fred?
No, it just makes me right.
It doesn't.
They're overproduced, formulaic ear garbage.
Oh, really? You know who might disagree with that? Facts. 50 million albums worldwide, 11th best-selling musical act of all time, Billboard's most successful rock group of the last decade, 6 Grammy nominations, 12 Juno Awards, those count, 6 Billboard Music Awards, 2 American Music Awards, 1 People's Choice Award, Canadian, and a partridge in a pear tree.
Sorry. I thought we were just having fun. I didn't realize it was
You gotta say, you were nicer as a kid.
Again, if you can defend that position, I'm totally willing to listen.
It's about the music, folks, not about the band.
Tired of living like a blind man.
Sick aside of a sense of feeling. This is how you remind me.
As a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in? So you go to a podcast your very first time, and it's been going on for about, let's say, a year, and you want to go back to the very beginning to hear how they started. What does that first episode have to keep you coming back to the next episode?
Host, chemistry, and interesting content. For example, because this is a really good example for me. When I started listening to the Delta Flyers, which is the Star Trek Voyager podcast hosted by the 2 former cast members, I started with the latest episode at the time, which involved the Borg, which is my favorite Star Trek bad guy ever. But I'm like, you know what? I've been looking for an excuse to go back and rewatch the entirety of Voyager anyhow. Why the hell not? And I went back and listened to everything, and it was just cool hearing all the behind-the-scenes stories, how different things work in Hollywood. And then I was kind of doing a watch-along at the same time. I'd listen to an episode, I'd watch the episode. Now it's gotten to the point where I just listen to the episodes, and if it's interesting, I'll go back and rewatch the actual Star Trek episode they're talking about. I think I'm about halfway through season 2. I think the episode I'm listening to is called Alliances right now, where they team up with the Kazon or something. And I'm thinking, all right, that's pretty interesting. And that got me sucked in pretty good. When it came to the true crime podcast that I listened to, I think it's called Canadian True Crime. What got me interested there was the depth of research. When I was listening to her, she would cite sources, all things that were verifiable in the media. It's stuff that was publicly available and maybe some stuff that was maybe a little sensitive. But the way that she handled it, it wasn't sensationalized. It was human, and it was well done. It was like any investigative journalist piece that I'd ever heard, with very little commentary other than the fact, this is horrible that this crime happened. Here are the facts. Here's the order in which they went down. And especially with the Tori Stafford one, because that was such a huge news story here in Ontario for a long, long time. And the guy who killed her was a guy named Michael Rafferty, going through his history and how he connects to even some pretty big people on TikTok right now. I was like, that's interesting to me. You've got the angle, you've got the research, you've got the empathy. Let's go. And it's not just people going pew pew with like kind of lasers. Alternatively, I was always a big fan of Kevin Smith, and I started listening to Hollywood Babylon because I really liked him and Ralph Garman. Now, that being said, I do not like his Batman episodes he does with Ralph, because I just don't care. But when he did the live show at the comedy club, at the John Lovitz Comedy Club, I thought that was hilarious. And then Fat Man Beyond, as much as I like Kevin, Mark is more interesting. And I've had Mark respond to me a couple of times on Twitter, and I'm thinking, okay, you've got my attention. Another podcast I used to listen to, and I just thought about this now, is because I enjoyed their chemistry, and it got more interesting once I met them. When I met Ming Chen and Michael Zabsik, from I Sell Comics, formerly of Comic Book Men. That show got me interested enough to maybe take another look at comics again, because I'd been out of it for so long. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. Behind the scenes thing here, I think I've said this publicly, but I'm not sure. Before I was cast on Comic Book Men for season 3, I was talking with Ming and Mike on a pretty regular basis via email. And when they found out I was cast in the show and I was saying, hey, I'm a podcaster too, can we do something while I'm in Jersey? And they're like, yeah, that's a cool idea. Let's fucking do that. But the producers of Comic Book Man said, no, we can't do that because I guess it would spoil the surprise, I guess. So that sucks. That would have been a really, really, really cool experience because I met Rob Bruce when we were across the street there prepping the secret stash for the shoot that day. And me and Rob Bruce just shot the shit about like kind of Star Wars props. And I think he was surprised about how much I actually knew about kind of lightsabers, because that's always been my specialty in Star Wars, is identifying the different types. Like, is that a stunt saber? What was that made out of? What scene? Can I match that to screen accurate and blah, blah, blah. And it was just a really cool conversation because I haven't met too many people in my circle of friends that are huge prop guys that aren't necessarily into, like, for example, my next door neighbor, Liam, we love guns, which is funny if you know my position on things. But I love prop firearms. So we talk about the Aliens M41A pulse rifle or RoboCop's Auto 9 or Deckard's gun from Blade Runner. And it was neat to talk to somebody that wasn't an armorer. So that was a fun experience.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. As a listener, do you prefer short 30-minute to an hour and 30-minute shows, or do you prefer longer podcast episodes, as in 2 hours or more?
Depends on the topic, honestly. However, though, because I come from a broadcast background, I generally don't like anything over an hour, maybe an hour and a half at most. And I know some twigs have run longer than that, but that's usually because of the elements we're dropping in. But if the content's interesting, if I can cap it to about an hour, hour and a half, I'm fine. 2 hours fucking max, because who's got the time? And the example Alex always gives me was most people listen to podcasts on commutes. And I'm thinking, you know what? You're probably not wrong. My opinion of this might change if I had to drive into Toronto every morning. And if I don't want to listen to the local talk stations, here, I'll just throw on a podcast and it'll take me as I go to work. But generally about an hour is what I prefer, because the Delta Flyers is always about an hour and change-ish. And that's my preferred format.
As a listener, do you start at the beginning of a podcast, the most recent episode, or you jump around?
This kind of goes back to the Delta Flyers. I started with the latest episode, which I think was about the Borg. I think the episode I listened to was Scorpion, which is where the Borg and Voyager team up to fight Species 8472. And then I went right back to the beginning because I'm like, hey, let's see what Tom and Harry have to say. However, though, when it came to the True Crime podcast, Blair started me with Tori Stafford, and then I've listened to other ones. She did a one on Haunted Canada that was really interested. There's been some other ones that talk about other paranormal topics, and I'll always focus in on, like, hey, we're talking about skinwalkers this week. That sounds interesting. We're talking about, ghosts. All right, that sounds cool. Other podcasts, it depends on the guest. I remember I've only ever listened to like 3 or 4 wrestling podcasts in my entire life. And the first one I ever listened to was when Colt Cabana did the one with CM Punk that was really controversial at the time, where he like shit talked Ryback and all these other people. And
I remember that, yeah.
And I was like, okay, that is fascinatingly interesting. But I never went back after again. Plus, I found out Colt Cabana is supposedly a big piece of shit. So I'm like, all right, fine, fuck you. You don't get any listenership. Chris Jericho's podcast I've listened to a few times, but I swear to Christ, if I hear another ad for like Blue Chew or something. But yeah, like it ultimately depends on guest, unless the topic or the theme of the podcast is super interesting to me. So I am remarkably picky with my podcast because I'm so limited on time. I might only get an hour or 2 a week to listen, and 9 times out of 10, I'm doing something else. For example, as of this recording, I'm playing Call of Duty Vanguard on the Xbox, and I play a lot of multiplayer. I'm trying to prestige right now, so I don't have to listen to the game as much because I'm going to respawn when I play domination or hard point or whatever. And as long as I can keep my like K to D and my kill streaks up, I don't care. So, hey, what better time to listen to the Delta Flyer? So why not? Or why not listen to the latest episode of True Crime? And that's generally how it goes.
As a listener, how many hosts are too many on one episode of a podcast?
I think 2 is ideal. 3 is really good, especially if the hosts know each other's kind of chemistry. Anything above 3 to 4, it starts getting a little chaotic. And I can say that from a production background. When I used to produce sports radio, sometimes you'd get the main host and their co-host, and you might bring in a guest who might be like a famous athlete. Then you might get a sports reporter, and you get people just talking over each other unless they know each other's chemistry remarkably well. And just, I find it hard to focus in when there's too many voices going at once, especially if voices sound super not separate from each other. It has to be a very clear distinction. So yeah, I'd say 3 is ideal. 2 is perfectly fine. Solo is hard unless you know what you're talking about and have the gift of gab. Like one of the exercises we used to do in radio that before we were allowed on air over the airwaves was my college professor, Ron, or maybe it was Chris, had said, okay, here's your topic. I want you to talk about apples for 30 seconds and not say anything. And a lot of us were like, what the fuck are you talking about? And it was basically make apples interesting for 30 seconds. And it also kind of depends too, is if your hosts are interesting and if they've been humanized for a while and you've earned that right, so to speak, to talk about your personal life, that can be interesting too. And we used to call those kind of talk bits. One of the stations that I listen to out of Philadelphia is one called WMMR, which, by the way, has some of the best live 24/7 DJs I've ever heard. One of the guys who's become a friend of mine, we exchange emails and Twitter DMs, is a guy named Marcus in the Darkus. And we talk about D&D and all sorts of other nerdy shit. Another guy I talked to is a guy named Jackie Bam Bam. And we talk about music, my life. He's always curious to say. He's always super friendly over email. He's called me before for call-ins. Like, hey, Birdman, you got like 15 seconds? And he let me intro a song and everything. And yeah, it's just host chemistry is so important. And if you have that as a host, you can do almost anything. So I love listening to engaged hosts, but I think 2 is the magic number. 3 is a beautiful number if it works, but anything above 3, it can be utter chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. When do you stop listening to a podcast altogether?
When the topics become not interesting, or if it just degenerates into bitching, which, again, if you can defend your position, that's fine, and I respect that. But if it's going to be negative thing after negative thing after negative thing, I don't care. I've been on this planet for 40 years. I don't know how many years I've got left at this point. And I just want to have something enjoyable. So when a podcast loses its magic, or if I've moved on from that interest, that's when I stop listening. Like I remember, again, going back to my very early days when I used to listen to Star Wars Action News, I listened to them from 2004 till probably middle of 2007 when the Vintage Trilogy collection was coming out. But they had done all the Revenge of the Sith stuff, Star Wars Unleashed stuff was becoming really hard to find, and it was always getting scalped. And that's when I dropped out. I'm thinking, you know what? I can't deal with scalpers. I can't keep up with this anymore. It's been fun, guys, but thank you. And that's when I stopped listening to them. Mind you, I still have them on Facebook, so they're still good people, but I just haven't listened for a really, really long time.
Absolutely. All right, final question before we head to a break. What podcasts are you currently listening to, if any, and what would you suggest for our listeners?
Well, as I brought up several times, the Delta Flyers with Garrett Wang and Robert Duncan McNeil. If you're a Star Trek Voyager fan, it's pretty much required listening, because it's always interesting to hear about how the different directors did things, which is always kind of funny. How there's one thing they talk about, and it's called shake. And when you watch Star Trek, you know, when a photon torpedo or a phaser blast hits the shields and the entire bridge shakes, all the actors have to lurch in unison. And there's a story they told how there was a director or someone from Deep Space Nine saying, okay, forget everything you've ever learned and watch this tape. And I thought that was really fascinating. You just get a lot of really interesting behind the scenes. Plus, hearing Garrett Wang do his impression of Kate Mulgrew is priceless. Another one that I really, really, really want people to listen to, it's called Canadian True Crime. And it is about, well, Canadian true crime, but they also cover other crimes and stuff on there. Sometimes they do something a little bit lighter hearted. Like I said, they did something on ghosts and the paranormal across Canada. I want to say they did something on the Halifax explosion that happened in the First World War, but maybe I'm thinking of something else. Fat Man Beyond, depending on topic, can be really good if it does run a little long. Early Hollywood Babylon is really fun. I'm actually going to look at my phone really, really, really quickly here. Let's see what I'm actually listening to when it comes to podcasts. Let's see. Oh, I love this show, but I don't listen to it nearly enough. Post-Mortem with Mick Garris. Mick Garris is a horror director, and he works with Joe Russo, though not the same guy from the Marvel movies, which I was confused with for a really long time. But Mick Garris, he's the guy that wrote Hocus Pocus, but he also did the Stand miniseries. He's done some of the most successful Stephen King adaptations of their time. And he's just a really interesting guy who's been around Hollywood forever. And I knew him mostly from the Stand miniseries on ABC. But then he did a show called Masters of Horror, which was on Showtime for a couple of years. And it's incredibly well done. So if you want insights into the horror industry, I recommend that. There's another guy that I like, and his name is Finn McKinty, and he does the Punk Rock MBA. And it's funny how you mentioned Nickelback earlier, because everybody I know gives you shit for that. But he will go into reasons why the band, for example, isn't liked by the media. Is it their production? Is it their sound? Has something fallen out over the years when it comes to connecting with an audience? And he's opinionated, but I always felt his stuff comes from a place of trying to genuinely express things. And I've learned things about other bands I didn't know. And sometimes he'll list off, here's some bands you didn't know that did some really cool things, but they've kind of fallen off. Like I found Ice Nine Kills through them. I found Yellow Card. And sometimes he'll do playlists on Spotify from the shows he's done. Like, hey guys, here's a pop punk list from the 1990s. So from Green Day, Offspring, Pennywise, Bad Religion, whatever, here it is. Here's everything that I've talked about. And I really appreciate that. I also listen to a show called ACG, because I really enjoy this guy's review style. He's one of the few game reviewers I really trust his opinion. And then finally, the episode there's a show that I like, and it's the podcast syndicated version of their morning show, and that's Preston and Steve from WMMR. And they have a podcast or a segment on their show, but it's syndicated into a podcast called The Bizarre Files. And that's where I source a lot of Twig news from, because there is some weird shit that happens day to day, most often, Mike, in your country.
Yes.
Always Florida man, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, you got to be careful of Florida man, because Florida man will come after your ass.
Yeah, and he'll have like an alligator high on meth. So it's always something super interesting there. Plus Preston and Steve and Casey Boy and Kathy Romano. I'm sure I'm missing a name there. Oh, Marissa Magnata. Great chemistry. One of the best morning shows I've ever heard. and their podcast is just as well done.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and we'll be back after this.
Hey, it's Wes from Poppin' Off Toys. Wanted to let you know about poppinofftoys.com. We can be your number one source for Funko collectible figures to add to your ever-growing collection. If you're in Nashville, Tennessee, we actually have a retail store that you can come by, 5916 Charlotte Pike. And for the rest of us, poppinofftoys.com is always open, and you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And the name is just simply Poppin' Off Toys. Thank you so much, and always keep it poppin'.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk.
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing.
Car.
Download the show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
GCRN, the superhero webcomic. GCRN's got superhero antics and sexy girls. For action, comedy, mayhem, and more, read it now at DASIEN.com. DASIEN.com.
Goddamn.
Can't you just tape the microphone to your head?
Alrighty then.
We are back here inside Studio 2009's podcast approach with Mike the Birdman from This Week in Geek. Before we move on to your production value, or what you do as a producer, I do have one suggestion for you because I was shocked at this.
Okay.
And it was only through something else that I found out. You remember Ethan Suplee, right?
Yeah, the guy who couldn't see the sailboat.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's not a sailboat, it's a schooner, or whatever it was. Yeah, so from Mallrats, he has his own show called American Glutton, where he has people come on there and talk about their weight loss journeys and other things, I guess. I've listened to a few of these episodes. I don't listen to it very often, and I'm a fat guy, too. I probably should listen to every episode he's ever produced. But I'm just saying, like, holy crap, William from friggin', you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
wow.
he turned into a tank. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Very much so. All right. So we are all podcast producers around here. As a producer, do you find yourself listening to podcasts less and less?
Yeah, and it unfortunately comes down to time mostly, because like I said earlier, I've got so much going on week to week, day to day, where I literally have to look at my day and like, okay, where am I going to find time for X? And it's only in the last 6 months since I had my like gallbladder surgery and almost died earlier this year that I was like, you know what? If I don't take some time out, it ain't going to end too good for me. So I try and carve out at least 2 hours a day to watch some TV, listen to something, play a video game that isn't for work, or if it is, it has to be super fun, and just have fun with it. And yeah, I wish I had more time to listen to podcasts, but with me, I'm so picky, and I don't like that because I know there's a lot of really, really good work out there. Just the problem is, where do I find the time for this?
Yeah, exactly. I will make another suggestion really quick, only because I know you're a big Batman fan. And they're already done on 90% of the stuff anyway, and they've moved on to other things. Psychology and Batman, the Arkham Sessions with Dr. Andrea Letamendi and Brian Ward from Shout Factory.
Yeah, that's a show that always was on my radar. I just never got around to listening to it, unfortunately.
They're currently going through the MCU.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. As a producer, are you a podcast planner, or are you throwing stuff at the microphone to see what sticks?
It depends on what it is. For example, one of the earliest shows that we produced, and as far as I know, we were one of the first, way back in 2012 when we had the actual play podcast, These Warriors Are Terrible, aka TWAT. That was something we didn't know whether it was going to work. And that was a format I literally came up with on the spot. because I was like, okay, and an hour sounds cool. And that's how we would plan out each session, was like, okay, we're going to play fucking D&D or Star Wars. I have 4 hours to tell one story. I have 4 people typically, and I got to make it interesting. Shit. But fortunately, it worked out really well, and that format is carried forward. And even the guy who took over that podcast, now just called Terrible Warriors, Justin, has adapted the format and grown far beyond that, where he's adding music and sound effects. He has a music license that he pays for every year. And the production quality has just shot up so much more under him than it ever would have been under me. For me, I like the plan. When it comes to Twig, me and Alex, for example, we have a plan that typically goes throughout the week. We talk on Monday after the show's posted, or Tuesday, and like, okay, what reviews are you working on? What can I use for my show, Turd or Treasure? What goes into the main show? And then we look at all the relationships we have with all these different companies. When did stuff get sent to us? How topical is it? Is it evergreen? And we go through this huge checklist, and we're like, okay, that works, that doesn't work, that can be shifted there, this can be done here. When it comes to interviews, I don't pursue a lot. I'm finding more people are coming to me as I'm picking up a bit of a reputation again as being a really good and fun interview. So when it comes to prepping for interviews, I typically only take about a day or so, unless I know the topic tremendously well. And then we go from there. When it comes to planning anything else out, I like to produce elements and see if I like the feel of it. One show that we haven't done a lot of episodes with, just because the co-host's schedule can be somewhat unpredictable with their health, which I completely get, is something called the Nerd to the Third B-Sides with Skyblaze. And with them, I said, we're going to do your show, Nerd to the Third Power, but a little less formal. We're going to kind of strip away the Ask a Geek questions, and we're just going to have fun. We're just going to talk about stuff that doesn't require a shit ton of research. We want people to feel like you're still here. Let's have this conversation. And while I was building the elements, like the intro and extra, that's when the show came together for me, thinking, okay, I love the way this sounds. I love the way the extra sounds. This is the vibe I want. And that show clicks remarkably well, and I only have to produce it once a month, so there's not a lot cooking in the background, but when it does come together, it usually turns out fantastic.
Awesome. Very cool. We've talked about this earlier, but let's talk about it again. As a producer, are you a one-man show kind of host, or do you prefer working with co-hosts?
It depends on the project. When it comes to planning big stuff, I prefer to work by myself, and that's only because I know individual deadlines, and I prefer to have individual control over my edits. For example, I did a couple of podcast shows this year. One of them was a paid gig, and I said, I will do this, but if I do, I retain complete creative control. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, if I'm going to edit it, it's not going to sound like shit. If my name is put on this, you are not going to have 2 minutes of music. For example, there's one show, I'm not going to name it. Trust me, nobody here listens to it. But I was asked to put together a call-in show for a local community group. And one of the notes I got from one of the people in charge was like, oh, just put music here. And it broke my fucking brain. I'm like, fucking what? You want me to put music here? And I'm like, okay, first off, do you have the rights clearances to do this? Do you understand what you're asking me? I'm like, does your show normally do this? What's your format like? Does it fit with the vibe? And they're like, well, no. Like, well, then I'm not doing it. And I had to explain to them, and they were very receptive, because I don't think they'd ever had anybody from a professional background. And I realized that makes me look like a giant asshole, but I wanted their game to come up to a different level. And for the most part, it did. Like, it sounded really, really, really good once I started getting more directions from them. and it worked out really, really, really great. I mean, overall. And yeah, I just, when it comes to more collaborative projects, I don't mind working with a few different people because I want their input. But when it comes to producing individual elements, I like to create those. For example, everything you've heard on Twig, 9 times out of 10, I've made the element, be it from music or sound effects or voice clips. The only ones that were not done by me are the Twig transitional elements, though they were paid for by me. For example, Tristan, who used to be with the show, who's now on indefinite hiatus, has done all the VO for Twig. Like I give him a rough idea. Here's what I want you to say. Here's your time limit. Here's what I want. Make it happen, and then we'll go back and forth, and generally it works out really well. When I commissioned music for the Stargate show, which premieres in just a couple of weeks, I went back and forth with the composer who also did the music for the Twig main show now. I'm like, I want it to feel like Stargate, but I want it to not exactly be a one-to-one composition of Stargate SG-1 and Stargate the movie. Make it feel good. And he got me exactly what I wanted. And yeah, like I will fully admit, I'm a control freak because I want things to sound good. And Alex has made me better because Alex demands a technical perfection that maybe I'm not necessarily aware of. Like, are we putting this in the right kind of frequency range? Are we differentiating channels? For example, Alex has taught me a trick where I'll be in the one ear 30%, he'll be in the other ear right channel 30 more %, and it sounds like a conversation you would actually hear, but without putting one people in straight one ear and straight the other. And then if you have a central coast, for example, that magic number 3 that I talked about, you can use the position in the audio soundscape theater of the mind to position people, but you can do that from a technical perspective. So your brain will automatically filter, okay, Mike's on the right, Aaron's in the middle, and Alex is on the right. And it works out wonderfully. So he's made me a better technical producer, and he's definitely made me want to up my game when it comes to creativity. One of the things I'm experimenting with now, and I did this during the summer when Alex took his time off, we did a series of future imperfects and loose cannons. And for each topic show, I'd spend about an hour, 2 hours before the show that day, or maybe a few days beforehand, and I would make a custom introduction of about 45 seconds, because anything over a minute and maybe a minute and a half, you're going to lose your audience if it's nothing but fucking theme music. But if you can make it interesting, I find you'll hold people's attention more. So, for example, this was one of my more fun edits I did, is for the Angry Video Game Nerd Halloween special we did this year, where we talked about the George A. Romero movies. I wanted to create something that represented the zombie apocalypse, the fall of mankind, in about a minute. So I got quotes from the Night of the Living Dead when the first news broadcast pops up. I got one of the famous quotes from Peter and Flyboy, where he's talking about when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. And then there's a scene with Dr. Logan and Captain Rhodes, and Captain Rhodes is having a fucking freak out, and he's like, what are we going to do but shoot them all in the fucking head? And Dr. Logan says very matter-of-factly, well, Captain, the time to do that would have been at the beginning. They outnumber us 400,000 to 1. You don't have the ammunition. And then I quoted the late Dennis Hopper in Land of the Dead from the trailer. He's like, zombies, man, they creep me out. And then there's the sound of broken glass, which is from the trailer, which then shows the date. And I figured that's a good, solid edit point to transition right into the show. So I've got a very big creative streak, and I like to think I inherited that from Stephen Pierce, but I've made it my own sound over the years. I really enjoy imaging and editing. Would my stuff make it on the radio? Probably not. Maybe not. It did for a long time, and I did some stuff with AM 640 and Fan 590 in Toronto. But I love creating interesting soundscapes.
Very cool. Very cool. How do you, or did you in the past, go about finding your co-hosts?
Well, in the Niagara College days, we were all in the same program. We were all friends. Me and Dave, we just hung out, and Steve, we started out as adversaries because I thought he was cheating in class, and it turns out he wasn't. He was just really smart. And then that friendship has, kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, very much at a low point right now, even if it exists, but that's neither here nor there. The other Twig co-host, we just became friends. My one friend was dating another Twig person. Pierce and I just were best friends for like the longest time. And we just kind of stuck it out. Alex came onto the show because he used to watch my cartoon streams I used to do over live stream. And then we just started talking. He donated some games to one of the other shows that I used to do. And then he reached out to me at one point and we just started talking. However, though, funny story. Again, not sure if this is in the public record, but it is now. Sometime before my wedding, back in 2011, I think it was, I called Alex drunk. Very, very drunk. And I was like, who the fuck are you? Who's Alex? Fuck you. And Alex tells me this like years later. He's like, Mike, do you realize you prank called me? I'm like, no, I didn't. I don't even have your number. And I look at my phone because it syncs to my Google contacts. Oh, wait, I do. What? That's a wonderful piece of voicemail he's had saved for years, and I wish we still had it. When it comes to recruiting co-hosts now, the most recent acquisition was Aaron, and Aaron we knew through a friend of ours who was writing, once again, for Star Trek Adventures by Modifius. My God, I hate saying that word because I always stumble on it. But anyway, so Aaron was working on the Star Trek books, and I interviewed him about something, and then I can't remember how it happened. We just kept talking, and then me and Alex came up with the idea for Loose Cannon, and we found out Aaron loves B movies, and he has these huge opinions. And then I found out Aaron is a climate scientist for the University of Michigan. He works in the climatology department. He's like a state researcher. So he's basically NASA level scientist when it comes to understanding climate change. And I was like, you're really interesting. And we just started talking, and we've become really, really good friends ever since. When it came to bringing JT and Ken on the show, for example, I like to think I'm a pretty good judge of character, and it just worked out really well. Ken is wonderfully enthusiastic. He's also remarkably knowledgeable. JT brings a very human warmth to things that I really appreciate and I think is very much missing in the podcast space. He's a generally happy-go-lucky guy, and I wish more people had that attitude about things. I have had some co-hosts that haven't necessarily worked out in the past due to scheduling or whatever. And I wouldn't say I've thrown anybody under the bus, but other projects, sometimes they fall through, sometimes they just don't work for whatever reason. And that's fine and dandy, and I wish them well in their endeavors. There are some co-hosts I wish I could work a little bit more with, but they're space in the podcast world has diminished over the years, or they're hyper focused on something that I don't necessarily know a lot about. I don't want to steal their thunder, and they're doing their own thing. And you know what? As their friend and as a fellow podcaster, it makes me so happy to see them succeed under their own steam. And I think that's really cool. And two notable examples are David Double D Dennis, who does his own show, and Andrew Roebuck, who does his own show. And to hear these guys who started out with us once upon a time, and now they're doing their own things. Dave has written articles. Andrew's been published in magazines. He's been quoted in several different places. That's fantastic. And that's something I'm remarkably proud of. I mean, I don't know if it's something I can be proud of because I can't say I did this, but it's really cool to see them accomplish something in the podcast space that is uniquely theirs. And that's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you pushed them along.
Yeah.
Like, it's like with me. I don't just credit you. I credit 3 or 4 other people alongside you because you were one of the ones that helped me along the way. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. As a producer, and I wrote this question specifically for you when I originally did this, because for me, I only need a set of headphones and a CAD. But as a producer, do you feel like you need the giant mixing board and all the fancy stuff that would essentially be in a radio station, or are you good with a great mic and headphone setup?
There is one piece of equipment I wish I had, and Justin has it on Terrible Warriors, and it's called a Rodecaster, and that just allows you to mix in stuff in real time. And as much as I love being able to add the feel and the vibe of live AM or FM radio, I'm perfectly fine with adding it in post, because if you mix your music too hot when you're talking, you can't separate those channels in post 9 times out of 10, unless you're recording directly to a computer, in which case you can see it, and I'm sure you could fix it, but whatever.
Yeah.
I prefer to add a lot of stuff in post, so as long as I have a good quality mic and soundboard, I'm fine. Would I like live mixing for sound effects or something? That'd be fun. Hell, on my mixing board, I know I can do sound effects. I know I can add vocal effects to my voice. Do I know how to do it? Nope. And I'm not going to learn because I don't want to get lazy with it, because I think if I do it in real time, sure, it might be funny in the moment, but what if I fuck up? So I'd rather have the ability to correct that mistake in post, put that joke in later if I want, and it just works out fine. So honestly, good mic, good mixing board, but what's most important to me is having a solid internet connection. I learned this year, don't rely on wireless headphones when doing podcasts. And I used to tell Alex all the time, like, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And then I started getting radio interference for whatever reason. And now I'm plugged directly into the soundboard via auxiliary cable, and everything sounds so much better because the frequencies are so much richer. So if you have a really good upload and download speed, like I've got the fastest internet you can get outside of super commercialized internet, because thank you, Rogers, for that. And I got a really sweet friggin' deal on it. Yeah, because if you don't have a good connection, you're going to have a shitty sounding podcast because your hosts are going to break up and you're going to have to fill dead air. And unless you know what that person was talking about, you're going to make your job so much harder in post.
Yeah, Steve Megatron sometimes will fill that with animal noises, sadly.
Oh, boy.
Sometimes. At least he used to do that. I don't know if he still does or not. As a producer, how much time do you put into the editing of one show?
I've got it down to a science. So Twig, for its hour-and-a-half runtime, let's say that's the average length of a show. So let's break it down into its components. So if I'm doing a review, for example, let's say I'm reviewing let's pick something. Let's say I'm reviewing
Christmas Crunch.
Let's say I'm reviewing Christmas Crunch. I want a sample from a commercial that sounds appropriate, if not directly related to the product. And then I want something at the end. Typically, I don't go over 30 seconds, because over 30 seconds, you're going to lose the audience. Don't fucking do it. 45 seconds, you're really pushing the levels of people's attention spans. So I'll use 2 sound elements, and then I'll find appropriate music. I try and get something from the franchise or the product that I'm talking about. More recently, I've been using the YouTube music library or royalty-free music, and we've been crediting the artist where appropriate. But I've also bought humble bundles that include, here's all the music, you now own the rights to it, party the fuck on, whatever. So a an element to create that, figure 20 minutes to half an hour to record till I get a take that I'm happy with. Then 5 minutes capturing audio, trimming it up, making sure that it sounds good, splicing all that together. So figure about a half hour-ish per review. So that can add up to about an hour and a half, depending if I'm doing all 3 slots that week, which isn't often. And then editing the show, it goes intro, if there's a promo, the theme, which is 1 minute, the introduction, which is usually anywhere from 10 minutes to 20, then first element, which is whatever. Then I put a transitional element in there, which is usually about 15, 20 seconds. And then I'll put the news on top of that. And then I'll do middle element, weird news, introduction, stories. Then this is always my challenge right at the end of the show. If I do a review, if there's a sound clip at the end of the review, let's say I'm reviewing, I don't know, D&D or something, and if I can't find a good voiced sound clip, I'll put in something funny or something weird that doesn't diss the product unless it really sucks. Like, for example, in the most recent episode of Twig, I reviewed the Jackbox Party Pack 8, and I used the fail horn from The Price is Right. Now, originally, again, behind the scenes here, I was going to use the line from UHF from Wheel of Fish, where they're like, do you take what's in the box or do you take 120 pounds of snapper? And the host is this over-the-top racist caricature, and he's like, stupid, you so stupid. And Alex talked me out of using that because he's like, do you want to piss people off? I'm thinking, well, no. And technically this is funnier. And that's always what agonizes me, is always the last clip before the outro of the show. And then I put the outro on, and then sometimes if me and Alex have a blooper, I'll put that at the end of the show. So honestly, if I have all my elements done ahead of time, which I usually do, not as much often, just because it's November, and October, November are the worst months to get anything done. Just because a lot of product comes out, holiday gift guide starts coming up. I'm in school right now, so projects are piling up. Time is at a premium. So in the ideal world, I can edit a Twig show in about half an hour. When it comes to other shows, like say Earth versus Soup, which is the 50s and 60s sci-fi podcast, which Alex edits, but I used to edit in the beginning. I could do that in 5 minutes, because that was basically leveling the audio, making sure, because Darlene speaks naturally quiet anyway, and they use a very specific microphone, so I always have to kind of play with it. Alex does it now because he's got a filter and a preset set up for it, but he can do that in 2 minutes. So certain shows will take less than 10. The average length is about a half hour or more, depending, but never more than an hour typically.
Oops.
No comment. I just can't. I bow down before the editing overlords, because no. Of course, then again, I have no life, and I have way more time than you guys do. But anyway, that's beside the point. As a producer, do you prefer in-person recordings, like someone is sitting right next to you, or over the internet, like via Zencaster?
It depends on the context, and this very much played a role during the pandemic. When me and Alex used to record, that was our hangout day. We would get together on Sundays or Monday mornings, and we'd hang out for the day, but the show always came first. And then when he went home, I would edit the show. When we record in person, the energy feels different. You can vibe off the person. You can feel their body language. You feel the tone of the room is what I would call it. And recording online, when you know the person really well, you can hear certain tells in their voice. When are they going to stop speaking? When can I pick up the ball and kind of run with it? And you just get into a natural rhythm. Now, when I'm doing an actual role play game podcast, I prefer that in person. And here's why. Going back to what I just said, I like to pick up on body language around the table. when I did a recording, this would have been about 6 or 7 years ago now. I recorded an episode of Terrible Warriors called Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I think I called it Paradise Lost or something like that. And there was a very emotional scene where real emotions, people were crying and tearing up at the table. And I've been accused of being an emotional vampire, so to speak, because I love to bring out those emotions of people consensually, of course. And when you know how to put the pick in someone's armor to bring out a really good response, and as long as everyone at the table's comfortable, you can bring up some really good performance moments, because I think everybody expects actual play podcasts when it comes to role-playing games to be, oh, hey, here's Critical Role and Matt Mercer, and fuck, I hate that show. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But yeah, so when you can really know your co-host's vibes and feel, it's better to record in person, because you're going to get a more grounded response. Online, again, if you really know someone's tells, it's really, really, really good. However, though, on the other side of that coin, when you record over the internet, some people are a lot looser because they don't have to look you in the face. They don't necessarily feel your body vibe or your energy in the room, so they may be at a more relaxed position with you. So it vastly depends among who you're recording with, but ultimately during the pandemic, I've learned recording remotely is so much easier. It means sometimes I have to wait to get audio back because Alex does all the techno wizardry in the background. He's tried to teach me. I'm getting better at it, but he can turn around a piece of audio in 15 minutes or less. It might take me half an hour. And I realize that's only 15 minutes, but that 15 minutes is the difference between me being done early and me having to spend probably another hour at it because I get the thinking too much and I overthink something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, the funny thing about in-person, just really quickly for me, I've been doing over the internet for years. I've been doing Skype, Zencaster, whatever, for my whole career in air quotes. And when Steve Megatron came to my wedding, I'm a one focus, like, you tell me to look at the script, I'll look at the script. I can look at the script and talk. I can't look at the script, talk, and then look at you. So, like, having to have a conversation with him and still look at the script sometimes is like, you know, I would much rather have him in my ears than sitting right next to me.
See, and that's something that I abandoned very quickly in my radio career, because early on, when they teach you to do your bits, when you're doing on-air stuff, they want you to have a script. The problem is, unless you are good, you can tell when someone's reading. It's the rhythm and the staccato of their voice, and it just comes across as so unnatural. And dare I say, at times, not everybody does this, but it sounds very disingenuous and very disinterested because they're so hyper-focused. So when you can be with someone face to face, again, feel the room, you will adapt as a presenter. And that's a skill they teach you in broadcasting school. Not everybody understands it. My school wasn't very good with it, but I knew other podcasters and other people who were performers who taught me that. And scripts are good now and again. But even when I do interviews, for example, most of my questions I generate on the spot because I'm listening to what people are saying and I'm generating questions while they're talking. Now, that may sound like I'm not listening, but when you're in live radio, you may have a little bit of prep time and sometimes you won't. So you better be on the ball and be able to think fucking fast.
Absolutely. As both a listener and a producer, do you prefer one feed have everything, or should each type of show have its own feed?
You are going to annoy so many people if you separate things into different feeds. That's just my experience. However, though, as long as you're not throwing like a fire hose of content at them literally every day, several times a day, it's not too big of a deal. If you got one show coming out a day, maybe two, that's not so bad. If you've got like 10 coming out a day, I hope you're being well paid. And if you're not, maybe consider scaling back. Like, I know for a while we talked about doing that early on with Twig, and then Alex explained to me the technical logistics of it and how you're splitting up your listenership and segmenting it. Yeah, it's easier to get metrics, but those metrics won't be accurate because you've segmented the population of where things are coming from. So I much rather having a one-stop shop, and now with platforms like Spotify, Apple, et cetera, one RSS feed, if that's all you have to manage, fucking A. If it's one YouTube channel, that's a little bit different because one YouTube channel may cater to a certain piece of content and another may do something else. That's fine because that's literally just clicking. Whereas Spotify or something like that, you have to go in, pick the RSS feed. And I know it sounds like I'm just saying the same thing over again. Maybe it's just the way that I perceive it, but I think online it's a much easier thing to just select whatever YouTube channels and hit sub. Whereas audio platforms, it feels a little bit more involved.
It depends. I mean, as long as you can, what I've found from how long we've been doing it, as long as you have whichever audio platform, let's just say Apple, to just because this is the one I know. I remember Steve Megatron had to basically go in and tell them, look, all of these shows, list them under the Geekcast Radio Network. And if you search for the Geekcast Radio Network and you hit any one of our shows, because all of our shows are so different, you can find one subheading for the Geekcast Radio Network, and most of our shows are there unless one hasn't been added yet, which I think this one hasn't. But anyway, how do you use social media to promote your show?
Social media is such a weird creature because for years upon years, I had my Facebook open as public and I would interact with fans. And in the last year, I've had some really unpleasant interactions with people, and I've had to change my Facebook mostly to private. I do still have a Facebook fan page. I do need to update that more often than what I do. But thanks to Spreaker, and when the Facebook API decides to work, it auto posts our stuff to Facebook and Twitter. Alex manages most of that. However, because I've built my personal brand over the last 15 years, my Twitter account usually hovers around 4,000 plus followers. And that's where a lot of people get news and commentary from. Mostly now it's politics, cute animals, and late night musings, but occasionally I'll talk about video games and other shit too. So yeah, like I find social media as a way to get to know the hosts if that's how you want to approach your career. Because there are certain content creators out there, they use social media, but you don't know fuck all about them. Like you don't know their real name, and not everybody's comfortable sharing their real name, and as well they shouldn't. And other content creators, you know a little too much. And for me, I like to think I fall in that category where I maybe overshare sometimes, but that's always been who I've been. I've been very transparent with who I am. If I'm struggling, I will tell you. But if I'm also having a good day, I'll tell you as well. When it comes to social media strategy, I find reaching out to brands on Twitter has been really, really, really well done. If you tag a certain company, usually you'll get their attention. Like I get a lot of retweets from Modifius. I get retweets from Gale Force 9, Hasbro, all these companies where I cover video games and role-playing games and board games. These people really, really well respond because they're niche industries. And, you know, it's just a good thing when your show comes out once or twice a week and it's your main focus. It's easy to do that because we have so much stuff on Twig. You know that Thursday is Earth versus Soup Day. Friday is typically Future Imperfect Day. Wednesdays is usually Turd or Treasure. And if I think about it, I'll promote them on my Facebook page and on my Twitter whenever I think to retweet it or add commentary to it. And when I reach out to a famous person, like, for example, I just did an interview with Brian Volk-Weiss from the Movies That Made Us and Star Trek Center Seat. Tagging him and using the Netflix hashtag was really effective that way. But then again, my most effective tweet was a viral tweet of a Pomeranian dressed as fucking Paddington Bear with over 1.5 million views and counting until I deleted the thing. Because I'm like, fuck, people stop talking, but I know I can mute it. But yeah, it's so different and it varies from person to person. I don't use TikTok because I don't want to show my face, and maybe that's a personal thing. Instagram I use mostly for posting fun little things. Like I said, Facebook is primarily where I communicate with family and friends and fans that have become friends. Twitter is open to everybody unless you're a dickhead, which I'm glad some of the privacy features are different on there now. So that's very nice. And yeah, I mean, it vastly depends on what social strategy you wish to employ. I gotta say, some podcasts use it really, really, really effectively. Some don't. And I'm glad I'm not a full-time social media manager because I would be pulling out my hair because metrics are such a pain in the ass to track.
Yes, they are. What is your favorite topic to discuss on a podcast?
It's kind of changed over the years. Like, it used to be anything geek media, and that's still a very large point to it. But I find myself more and more drawn towards political topics. And if you've been following me for any number of years, it's pretty obvious where my politics lie. But I'm always willing to listen to people and talk with them. But I wouldn't want to start a political podcast because fuck, I don't need that headache. No. But I do love talking role-playing games, which is a subject I'm hugely into, but I'm not a designer yet. I love talking movies, ones that I love, especially like Aliens and RoboCop. If I get a chance to talk props, I'll talk for like an hour or more just talking about different armorers and stuff like that, how you may have seen this gun in this movie, like isn't that cool sort of thing. Like, in fact, I was watching Predator a couple of months ago, and I'm pretty sure Rambo's M60 shows up in Predator for a moment. I think we've screen matched the gun, but I'm not sure, which means they must have shared a common armor, or that gun is just really, really widely used, which is fine. I love talking comic book movies because those are easily accessible to me. And when I hit the right series of comics, I love talking about it because JT got me into Gen 13, which is an old comic from the 90s. And it's 90s as fuck. Let's get that right out of the way. But I love the art style. And I found the movie on YouTube because it was never released over here formally, yet it's got this really good cast in it. John Delancey plays a guy in it named Lynch, who's like their version of like Professor X. And it's just a really cool movie, and not many people have seen it. And I got into the comics because when I was a kid, I read Roxy Magical Drama Queen because I was just getting into anime at that time, and I didn't know what it was. I just thought it looked cool. And so talking about things that I can learn about, I'm huge into. One of the things I really got into recently is science. I love talking space. I love talking astronomy, biology, stuff like that. And with the pandemic, I have picked up an interest in biology because my sister works as a nurse practitioner. So I understand a lot of the complicated science that goes into some of the immunization and virology and transmission vectors. So it's interesting from a layman's standpoint to understand things. So when I get a chance to talk with scientists, in fact, I'm working on something right now with National Geographic, where I get to talk to all these scientists who have been to the Antarctic. They've studied penguins. There's another guy who's the first blind person to ever climb Mount Everest. I don't have any of this confirmed yet, but I love to talk to people that have had interesting experiences. I'm trying to get an interview right now with the Canadian Space Agency because, well, what's it like up there? I mean, I'm not expecting to get Commander Hadfield, but if you could tell me, hey, we're going to talk. Here's the payload specialist who was on the ISS for 6 months. What do you want to talk about? Like, okay, ma'am, we're going to talk about X for an hour. That's what I want to do. I love talking science.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. You've always loved talking about science.
She blinded me with science.
All right. Now, you've mentioned already that Twig almost shut down in 2008. You've mentioned that you're at your 40th birthday, or yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're
a couple of weeks
whatever.
ago.
Yeah. So happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
And that you're not really slowing down, but was there ever a moment besides that one that you mentioned where you felt like Mike the Birdman felt that you never wanted to do anything with a podcast ever again?
There have been moments where, like, sometimes late at night, I'll get, frankly, depressed because everybody in the house is asleep and I'm just here with my thoughts. And there are times where things on the show aren't necessarily the most fun because I'm buried under deadlines. I don't get a chance to hang out with like Blair as much. There's just times I don't get to see the family that I want to see. I don't get to create the bonds that I want to. And people always say, we'll make time. And there's been times where I've looked at my phone, I've looked at my life and saying, you know what would make me happy is if I could have all my internet history erased, just quietly fade away, have a single tweet on my profile. Thank you for everything. You've all been fantastic. Be excellent to each other. Learn from that. And if I could walk away from podcasting and accomplish everything that I've ever wanted to, I would find a way to responsibly chuck my phone into the proverbial ocean, retire to some place with a really killer internet connection, have my wife and my kitties, and that's it. And that would be the greatest retirement plan I could possibly think of, is to be scrubbed, but be remembered as a good guy. And there's been more than a few times when especially this year, when I had my gallbladder and my liver troubles, and Alex benched me for a few months, and I was thinking, you know what, man? Do I really want to come back? But then I got some really nice fan mail thinking, you know what? People still give a shit. People still care. And it meant a lot to me. So thinking, you know what? If you can draw strength from my struggles, then it feels like a responsibility that I should keep going because it's so easy. It means a lot to people. And I hope I'm adding something to the world of value. So, yeah, there has been times where I've questioned things for just a few minutes, but I remember the good people I've met along the way. I remember the lives that I've touched along the way. And I've even gotten notes from people who've said they've been at near the end of their rope. And just knowing that I would be there week after week, despite everything, I keep going. And that's very meaningful, and that's very heartwarming, and that's why I'll keep going until I'm no longer welcome in this space or until I've accomplished everything that I want to.
That's awesome. Okay, folks, with that story being told, we need to switch question 26 and 28 because we have two more that are just, I don't even know how I can follow that up, but let's just go with this one. What do you see as the differences between podcasting versus being on the radio?
I think it mostly comes down to time constraints and production, because there's a difference between being on live radio, satellite radio, and then podcast. Podcast, you control the process typically from start to finish, unless you're sponsored, in which case you may have to fulfill certain requirements. With radio, you've got news, traffic, weather, breaking news. anything can happen. Equipment can break on the air and bad shit can happen. My first on-air shift, I remember this at Niagara. We had something that was known as the cart system, which is where there are CDs mounted in these weird clear cases. And this is when computerized audio was just really starting to come into it. We had like an older version of what they use in radio where you can program the entire day. That system crashed when I was on air. So I remember having to drop Barry fucking Manilow in the middle of the day on a college radio station. You can guess how well that went.
Was it Mandy? Please tell me it was Mandy.
Fuck, I don't know. Whatever it was fucking horrible. And I remember coming back out of that break thinking, well, folks, I got nothing for you. And that was an experience. But live radio has a vibe that really can't be matched anywhere else. But live radio is fun, like being inside of a studio with engineers and producers, and most studios now have live streaming cameras that show you getting animated and being involved in the process of things. And hopefully it's just, it's one of those things. However, podcast, you can control when you record, how you record, you control things over the final product. And I don't know. I prefer pre-produced unless I'm being interviewed. If I'm being interviewed, give me live radio all day. If I'm doing the hosting, I would prefer to be in control of every conceivable element to make sure it comes out the best that it possibly can be.
Absolutely. Over your 15 years, I know you've done a lot of interviews, but what are some of your favorite ones with some of the famous people you've talked to?
Oh wow, that's a hard one. Shit, I have talked to a lot of people. I actually really enjoyed talking to all the adult stars that I've talked with over the years. I remember one girl, her stage name was Stoya, and she used to work for a Digital Playground. And I remember her just being a real load of fun before the interview and after the interview. I think I hung out with her for like an hour after the interview, just shooting the shit about stuff. Another fun one is when I interviewed the voice of Goku from Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Z Super. Sean Shovel's a weird guy, but my God, is he fun. The first time I interviewed him was at Fan Expo. I'm looking at my wife here, 2007. And he stole the microphone from me and said, "Hey, fat man, hold on. I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'm like, did Goku just jack my shit? So Goku ran around the con floor just making up wild voices and crazy things. And we didn't know what the audio was until we got home. And that was so much fun. Another person I had a really fun time talking with was this space scientist, and I think her name was Tamitha Scove. And she studies space weather, more specifically how it relates to the sun and whatnot. That was a lot of fun. I've talked my most recent interview with Brian Volk Weiss, and we were talking about the movies that made us. And he told me a story about how they got Nancy Allen on the RoboCop episode because it almost didn't happen. And another story about how Jennifer Grey's agent kind of sucks because she didn't find out about the episode until after it aired. And that's a lot of fun. Like, I love getting behind the scenes info for people. Kyle Hebert, who's the voice of Ryu, and Gohan from Dragon Ball Z has been a fun one. He's always been a great time. Mark Meir, who plays male Commander Shepard. I talked to Jennifer Hale, who that is my Shepard from Mass Effect. One interview, and this person has stayed with me for years as a friend, even when I was in the hospital with my amputation and even with my liver, they would check in on me. And that's Allison Court, who was Lunette from the Big Comfy Couch, but also Jubilee from the X-Men and Lydia from Beetlejuice. I had a conversation with her a few weekends ago on Twitter, and she's like, "Hey, Mike, How's it going? I've been keeping track of you this year. How are you and your sister Katie doing? Katie, for those of you that don't know, is my half sister by blood on my father's side. I found through DNA testing last year. The fact that somebody who is so remarkably busy remembered that little fact about me speaks volumes of her character. And just knowing that I have famous people who give a shit, they're not just famous people, they're people. And the fact that if I need something like a favor from Mark Meir, he'll be like, yeah, sure, Mike, what do you need? Like, the first time I met him, we played Dungeons and Dragons, and he dressed up as Hunter S. Thompson in my hotel room. And I'm trying to tell this really serious story about man and machine. Can they work together? And he looks at me dressed as Hunter S. Thompson. And he's like, yes, you and I can work together. Hand and robotic claw, twirling, always twirling. And I looked at him like, Mark, you're going to fucking break me, dude. And it slayed me. And years later, I ran into him at a convention here in Guelph, of all places, and his moderator couldn't make it. And he sees me. He's like, hey, Mike, do you want to moderate my panel? So me and Mark Meir got to sit there and talk Dungeons and Dragons in front of an audience of like 40 or so people, because it was a pretty small con. Plus it was the middle of winter, but it was fun. It was just really neat to meet all these people. And I guess finally, oh man, talking with Tim Russ from Star Trek Voyager, who plays Tuvok, was certainly a fun experience. Also talking with Rob Picardo, who plays the emergency medical hologram, was fun for one weird reason. So we're doing the interview and Bob asks me to pause for a second. I'm like, okay, sure. What's up? Fucking Bill Nye the Science Guy walks into his house. He's like, oh shit, I'm sorry. And I said to Robert Picard, I'm like, is that Bill Nye? He's like, oh yeah, that's Bill. We're friends. I'm like, okay, just let me collect myself.
Yeah, exactly. Let me pull myself up off the floor.
I'm like, that's weird. And yeah. It was just something so unworldly that I never expected to happen. So a lot of people from sci-fi are really fascinating to like talk with over the years. And the fact that I can call some of these people legitimate friends is something so utterly cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. The one thing I remember Picardo from, besides his Star Trek stuff, was he was the voice of Amazo in Justice League Unlimited.
Oh.
Yeah. What advice do you have for new and veteran podcasters in the art of podcasting?
Don't get an ego about things. Do not worry about your listenership numbers. Do not worry about being the biggest thing on the planet. Do not worry that you're not sponsored by Screenwave or Audible or Blue Chew or NordVPN. And if you take on a Raid Shadow Legends thing, I will break your fucking knees. Just because I get so sick of that game. But anyway, yeah, it's basically don't be a jerk. Do not be a jerk. Treat every fan interaction you get with respect. If someone disrespects you, disengage in the best way you can. Don't feed the trolls. Don't read the comment section if you can avoid it, because you are going to get people that won't like you for whatever reason. But everybody is entitled to their opinion. Sometimes those opinions can be hurtful, but that's the way life is, and that's just the way people are. But understand that you are entertaining, you're creating, and that's most often enough. Like I said very early on in this interview, you don't have to monetize every hobby you do. You don't have to be, I'm going to be the next Chris Jericho. I'm going to be Joe Rogan. Don't be Joe Rogan. And just be a good person ultimately and present what you feel passionate about as best you can, as honestly as you can, and don't get an ego over it, because nobody likes a jerk, and people generally like a nice person. Just don't be phony about it. Be very genuine. Be very transparent, and also respect those parasocial boundaries. Sometimes you will make some real friends out here, but don't force it. Like some people get close to their podcasters or people in the media, and sometimes those turn into genuine friendships, but they don't always. And don't be upset if that doesn't happen with you. Also, don't expect fans to send you stuff. If it happens, that's really cool. But instead of them buying you something, I'd rather get a nice piece of fan mail. And those are the things that stay with you for a lifetime. And for all the times I've gotten cool stuff from fans, some of it's been really, really, really appreciated. But I remember the fan mail that says I made a difference to them most of all. And I guess the biggest piece of advice I can give to a new podcaster or old podcasters is what my friend Liam said. Leave the world a better place than when you found it. Put something good into it. And it doesn't matter what that is. Don't be an asshole. Be as excellent as you possibly can be. And do it because you love it. Don't do this because you think you're going to get a sponsorship. Do it because it's genuinely entertaining to you. And if you're entertaining, people will find you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better than myself, folks. He is completely right. And as far as the opinions go, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. And the thing of it is I got into this whole thing because I thought it was the very first pod right before you guys, right before Twig. The very first podcast I listened to was called World's Finest Podcast. And it was just these two dudes reviewing every episode of every DC Animated Universe cartoon that there was. When I first saw the title and the art, I'm like, ooh, is that with Bruce Timm and Paul Dini? Because I thought they were doing a podcast. I didn't know. And, X number of years later, look where I am. Look where you are and look where we all are, Where can the people find your shows?
Well, we are across most major platforms at like Spotify and iTunes, Spreaker. Best place to go is thisweekingeek.net. Shows are posted almost daily. Twig main show typically airs on Mondays, if not Tuesdays at the latest. Thursdays is typically Earth versus Soup. And then other stuff. My social media is at Birdman across everything. I'm most often active on Twitter and Instagram. I do have a Facebook fan page. Like I said, I'm not super active on there. I'm really going to try and change that in 2022. And I love playing video games. So if you're not an asshole, let's play some COD together. That might be kind of fun. So yeah, you can always find me. I'm always willing to talk to almost anybody. Mike at thisweekingeek.net goes directly to me. And I'm always willing to engage in a fun and interesting conversation with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us here inside the studio. If you'd like to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment and listen to all of our content. Send us email to feedback@geekcastradio.com. Here are all the ways you can listen to us nowadays. Apple and Google Podcasts. Leave us reviews, please. Spotify and any other podcatching client you choose to use. Follow us on Twitter at Geekcast Radio is for the network. At ITS Studio 2009 is for the show. I am at TF2 and Mike. You can also follow Mike at Birdman Dodd. Become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. And you can also check out Studio 2009 podcast over there as well. Coming up next, I think Steve Megatron is returning. And I believe we're going to be doing a discussion on the Ryan Reynolds movie, Free Guy. I think. I don't know. I don't remember. For now, I am TF2 and Mike with
Mike the Birdman saying, be excellent to each other, get vaccinated, stay safe this holiday season, and like I said before, put something good back in the world if you can.
Absolutely. We'll hear us back in the studio soon.
I have always liked Kawabunga.
Huh?